So let's get started. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Vasculitis Foundation webinar today. I'm Kathy Olewski, the host for the Vasculitis Foundation Educational Webinar Series. I'm also a patient living with MPA vasculitis. These webinars are part of the Vasculitis Foundation's commitment to patient education, and we would like to thank our sponsors, AstraZeneca, Amgen, and Novartis, for supporting these webinars. Today's webinar topic is discussion about the 2024 Barcelona Vasculitis Workshop highlights. So having done all the housekeeping, let me start by introducing our guest for today. Dr. Sebastian Sattui is the director of the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center's Vasculitis Center. He's an assistant professor of medicine at the University of Pittsburgh, and Dr. Sattui was awarded the 2019 to 2021 Vasculitis Clinical Research Consortium Vasculitis Foundation's Fellowship Award. We'll also be joined today by Joyce Kullman, who is the executive director of the Vasculitis Foundation. And as I said earlier, she will give us an overview of the patient meeting at the Barcelona International Vasculitis Conference. So welcome, Dr. Sattui. We're excited that you got to go to the conference and that you're here to tell us all about what your takeaways were from the conference.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I think it's always exciting, kind of giving this update and summary of what happens in all these meetings and giving a little bit an overview of why these meetings need to continue happening, right? Not that I'm not happy when I need to travel to some place like Barcelona and meet with a lot of colleagues as well, but I think it is a unique and prime meeting for everything vasculitis to be discussed, for people who have the same passion with regards to helping people who live with vasculitis, advance their knowledge of diseases, create new treatments, and also discuss like many aspects that are involved in the care of people who live with vasculitis. So it's a very unique kind of scenario. It's also very intense, I'll say. I think a lot of us come very kind of tired from this because there's a lot of things that happen during this meeting. I'll briefly cover some of kind of the exciting stuff that were discussed as part of the meeting as well, which is, it's going to be a combination of multiple things, to be very honest, right? So a meeting like this has like big whole sessions where what we call like the plenary sessions happen, and some of the kind of the large studies or clinical trials or kind of like new innovative studies are discussed. So within the highlights of this year, we had a little bit of a mix between kind of new clinical trials. One of them being, for example, which it's now published, which were the results of the MANDARA study. So it's the benralizumab comparing mepolizumab for the treatment of EGPA. Those results are already available. They have been published, and I think they clearly show that we have, fortunately, another tool for the treatment of patients with EGPA, which is exciting. Again, seeing kind of new agents coming, new options for us to offer our patients, seeing not only efficacy but safety is, I think, fantastic. Another exciting study that was discussed was actually the TAPIR study, which not necessarily talking about new things, but talking about kind of our old kind of friend slash enemy, which are steroids. And the TAPIR study actually looked into what happens in patients with GPA when we kind of go ahead and try to taper those last few milligrams of it. We need to see kind of the full data, but basically overall, the data, the results proposed were actually reassuring, seeing that the tapering of those last milligrams in most patients who were included in the study actually were tolerated fine, with a relapses did occur in a small subset of patients that had, specifically patients who had not received toximab treatment as kind of part of their maintenance treatment. But I think, again, it's giving a little bit more data that we haven't had before, and what happens in that kind of last edge of the race towards no steroids. So that was another kind of fantastic trial that was presented that we've been certainly wanting to see the results, and certainly kind of adds data that we still didn't have to focus on this. There were, I think, again, talking with plenaries, I think as a highlight, and I think that's probably speaks very kind of close to you, Kathy, the big honoree of this year's meeting was Dr. Ronald Falk, who actually gave a fantastic overview, and I think there's very few people that are more qualified than him, of like what is the landscape and the story and how the field has actually evolved. Going now to topics that we can even start discussing a little bit more, and certainly someone from his group started talking a little bit more on like what about the patients who understanding not only treatments and understanding not only kind of the markers that we look for, but looking further into markers that could actually give us shed a little bit of light on understanding who are the patients who might actually be in remission and even off medications, which I think is something that ideally we'd want for everyone. We clinically don't necessarily see that happening, but I think and again, there's certainly way more to learn about this, but it's not only from clinical observations, but trying to identify and understand why this might be achievable in some people, and I think that's exciting. And that was presented also by I think it's Megan Freeman from his group, who has been doing a lot of work in that field as well. A lot of specific other studies were done into, again, if we try to understand it and identify prediction and prognostication, right? Which I think we still need to do a lot better, but understanding a lot with regards to the useful information that we get from either renal biopsies in patients with ANCA vasculitis or urinary markers in order to predict response, to predict how treatments will go, and the recovery of renal function as well. There was a plenary session, at least a few kind of studies that were discussed in the plenary session. I will proudly say that also one of the studies that was presented on the plenary session were the final results of the VascStrong study. So conflict of interest, since the presenter of that talk was me. But this is a study that was actually done through the BPPRN in order to understand what is the prevalence and the impact of frailty in people who live with PMR. What is this associated to? How we can actually, what are the implications of frailty? And also, like, some of the data show that frailty might be actually not, might change. So there could be the possibility of amelioration of frailty in a small subset of patients. And that's where some of my other work was going. But as I kind of mentioned during that presentation, I think the exciting part from this is that that study, as all of the BPPRN studies, which other studies that were presented during the meeting included the VASC sleep study, the VPREG results as well, kind of shedding a little bit more light into what outcomes of pregnancy in women who live with vasculitis, the impact of sleep and factors associated with poor sleep for the VASC sleep study. All the studies that come out of the BPPRN are studies that have patient input, patient partner input, participation from the inception of the study to the final stage of publication, and even kind of generating more data for further next steps, have patients kind of leading this from all throughout the process. I think having a study coming out from the BPRN being presented in the big stage, to me, probably was the most exciting part of the presentation overall. There were several other kind of sessions as well, looking more into the genetics, environmental factors as well, which I think is something that we keep talking and maybe understanding a little bit more. There were sessions as well on imaging, trying to understand all these different tools that we're kind of and new technology that we have nowadays in order to better understand and better kind of assess our patients, assess risk of relapse, assess disease, and most importantly, prevent complications. There is always a lot of excitement on kind of, again, other new medications, as I briefly talked about AVOCOPAN as benralizumab, but now talking about AVOCOPAN, which is kind of the new kid on the block for the treatment of GPA and MPA. And most of the data at this point coming, which is again probably confirming what was seen in the study, and actually showing kind of confirming the positive findings as well, which include allowing our patients to stay in remission, allowing us to get our patients off steroids and seeing that improvement, not only in disease control, but also in the renal kind of recovery. So there were studies presented from safety of the medication, which are continuing to be reassuring, and some of the kind of a specific manifestations, such as severe pulmonary disease as well. We presented also an analysis looking into how the outcomes in different age groups as well. Which because the ADVOCATE study also included patients over the age of 75 as well, and seeing kind of good efficacy and good safety, which is, I think, exciting, and again showing that is another tool to hopefully stay around, that hopefully patients will continue to have access to, and then will continue to ensure good outcomes overall. Similar kind of with regards to uptake and real world data, not what we only see in studies. There was a lot of data as well on pembrolizumab as well. So again, I think seeing just all this data, all these medications that just around the corner were approved, now seeing them in the real world, helping patients, seeing the efficacy of them, seeing that patients are doing well with them without any complications, I think is certainly the exciting part. Another kind of good, fantastic presentation to highlight, and I think again talking about the importance and I think that excitement that is for us, kind of seeing the patient voice as well, is although not final, the new response criteria that are being developed for ANCA vasculitis, which I'm not going to get too much into the weeds on, but within the different domains or components of this response criteria, one of them is the patient voice, and actually the input and the response from the patient global assessment, which unlike kind of some of our other metrics where we are looking into blood work and so forth, which still are contemplated within the components of the response criteria, is actually also showcasing and highlighting the importance of how the patient is telling us how they're feeling, how they're doing, because at the end of the day, that's what we're here for. And I think on a different side of it as well, there were a lot of different sessions that, again, are the reason for these meetings to happen. Sessions that are focused around multidisciplinary care, because this is not a meeting only that includes rheumatologists. There are nephrologists, pulmonary, different specialists as well. Seeing how, again, multidisciplinary care, teamwork needs to happen in order for us to continue advancing the science and the care of our patients. Another session that was, I think, a couple of sessions were fantastic, which were actually also from experienced investigators, how to continue to engage and support the development of early career people, whether they're residents, whether they're trainees, whether they're medical students who want to continue in the field, to have a sincere interest for vasculitis, and for them to continue to succeed as clinician investigators, because it is important not only for established people to be part of these meetings, but certainly for the next generation and the one that comes after that, for us to secure a workforce that can successfully continue helping patients, more providers with experience that continue to advance the field. So I think for sessions to be emphasized in meetings like this is crucial for the mission that goes beyond each and every one of us, just to continue to extend care. And I think I don't want to get anyone too dizzy with everything else, and I'm glad to take any questions, but I've already talked quite a lot. I know Joyce wants to also mention a little bit about kind of the patient symposium as well, which I'm biased because I got to speak in my native language throughout in it as well. But I'll stop there if that's okay.
Yes, that's great. I'm like everything that you said. I have some specific questions for you, but I think what we'll do is we'll bring on Joyce Kullman now, Executive Director of the Vasculitis Foundation. And Joyce, if you want to share with us a little bit about what happened in the patient meeting.
Oh, great. Thank you, Kathy, for the invitation to speak. And I have to thank Dr. Sattui because he was one of our rock stars who helped us with the conference. So on Saturday, April 6th, the day before the workshop started, the VL helped partner and set up a patient conference. So we had 105 attendees. with patients, their family members, physicians, and researchers to come for the first ever patient conference held in Spain. So it was a great day. You know, we're so used to having regional conferences and symposia and virtual webinars and things like that. So bringing a day for patients and their families to get together and meet each other in person for the first time was just amazing. And so we partnered with two of the vasculitis experts in Spain, Dr. Maria Sid and Dr. Georgina, thank you. Oh my God. And she was amazing. Anyway, they helped us plan a day of meeting where we walked through for newly diagnosed patients, patients who've been around for a while. We talked about research. It was just a great day to bring people together. We partnered with the Spanish patient advocacy group, as well as the groups from Vasculitis Ireland, UK, and Vasculitis International. And I have to say it was one of the best things the VF has done in years was to bring this group together. Patients were thrilled to get to interact with with their physicians in a different way from their appointments. People stood around and visited. We basically had to kick them out of the hotel at the end of the day because we had to exit. But I just have to say thank you to all the speakers who came. It was a bilingual. We had a translation company, so people could. We had a team that was translating Spanish to English and English to Spanish throughout the whole day. And everybody wore headsets, just like in a museum, walking through a museum, taking a tour. But it worked really well. And we had patients participate on the panels. And it was a great day. I'm so thrilled how well it went. Thank you.
That's great to hear. And I just wanted to add, because you said something about translating, isn't that one of the Vasculitis Foundation's overall goal is to put some things in other languages other than English, or some of our...
Yeah, Kathy, that's a great point, because we're very fortunate to have patient materials. And Dr. Sattui last year helped us do a whole webinar series in Spanish for our patients. And I think it's really critical that we continue building out materials to help our patients.
I do too. Okay, Dr. Sattui, we do have a few questions coming in for you, so I'm going to ask you some questions. The first one is, are there any new treatments for PAN that came up in the conference? Are there any results from the Haven study regarding the hydroxychloroquine and PAN? I just want to remind everybody before Dr. Sattui answers that we can't take any specific medical questions that don't have anything to do with the conference, but some of these things could have come up in the conference, so I ask you about it.
That's fair. We did not see results of the hydroxychloroquine study to my knowledge yet. I think the study is still ongoing. Specifically for PAN, there was nothing treatment-wise presented. However, there were a few sessions discussing. We know that PAN is a disease that has actually, our understanding of this condition has changed a lot, given how previously it was associated to hepatitis. Now we know that that's not the case for most patients. Too. So there's a pretty big effort in trying to understand what really happens in patients who have PAN, and what are driving the different types of it as well. I cannot say anything specific to medications themselves or treatment themselves, but what I can say is that there were sessions and discussions of different international efforts to better understand, the same way as we have reached at this point with, for example, ANCA, what are the different what happens in patients with PAN. And this is an important thing, given the rarity of the condition, is that these are international efforts that are occurring. So I think it's the PAN investigator group, and they did have a large study that was published earlier this year as well. I think it's led primarily by a group in Turkey, but this is actually an international effort. So although we're not discussing treatments we didn't see anything right now, there's an effort to better understand, better characterize, better improve outcomes that will certainly lead to that. So maybe if you bring me back in a couple of years after Melbourne, and you give me some time to recover from that jet lag, I will be able to update a little bit more.
Okay, that sounds fair. I did want to also say this. Sure, to me as a patient, it's encouraging that research is getting such an international effort, that it's hugely promising to us as patients. And it is really exciting to know that research into the reduction of steroids is so high on the list. And I did want to say, with regard to that, somebody asked the question, as a result of the new studies, will there be revisions on steroid dosages and time periods on those dosages with regards to AVOCOPAN and steroids? I think that they're wondering if some more of that was focused on at the actual conference.
So the data from kind of, I think when we're talking about like the standard versus the new kind of recommendations for the use of lower steroid regimens, I think the data at this point between Paxivas, between the LOVA study, between the Advocate study just continues to be on the same trend. What I mentioned from the TAPIR study is the usual is a different scenario where, you know, we're talking about those last 5 milligrams where someone has now been in remission, and if there's a benefit of or if it's feasible, safe, of complete tapering off or just staying there. What we continue to see both from the, you know, again, outside of the trials and the real world data is the same signal. I think we need to continue minimizing glucocorticoids. Do we have a kind of a fixed recipe for everyone? I think that is, you know, we try to aim for that. Needs to be managed on a case-to-case basis, but the goal should be still to minimize as much as we can. And I think, again, the data is reassuring that seems to be the case, that's what needs to be aimed. And I think if anything, because there was actually also a session about like how different societies and their guidelines for recommendations, because it's sometimes not everyone gets on the same line. But I think if there was one thing that kind of all the societies have agreed on, is we need to do less steroids. So I think, you know, in that part, I think there is a pretty kind of significant consensus of minimizing it, and that's what we'll continue to go.
Well, again, that's great to hear. One of the viewers was watching you early, and when you first started talking, and said, "Can you let me know what was the first thing that you mentioned about the last stages of clinical trials for a new EGPA medication?" He or she didn't understand the name of it.
I started with the MANDARA study, which
MANDARA.
is benralizumab. So, but the MANDARA study is basically, and it's, like I said, this is already published data, is using it's a new IL-5 inhibitor, so a new interleukin-5 inhibitor that was compared to mepolizumab, which is already out in the market, and again, showing that we have yet another option. A few years back, we were still kind of set with what we had for the treatment of EGPA patients, particularly for those sinus issues, the pulmonary issues that continue to drive a lot of the steroid needs. But now we have not only one option, but hopefully soon to be 2 options for the treatment of EGPA, and particularly a sinopulmonary disease. So it's exciting in the sense that, again, that our toolbox continues to get filled, and I'm you know, it's an exciting problem to have.
Yes. And I will say that there have been some questions about EGPA. So was there any new research discussed for EGPA?
There were a few sessions specifically also trying to understand of, you know, what, like the differences that we see in patients with the EGPA, right? We talk about ANCA, but a lot of patients are ANCA negative, and like some patients have more eosinophils than others. So trying to understand what, not necessarily kind of like, okay, this is, you know, this disease, but it's probably wider, and how's the differences and how we need to better conceive, understand, study these conditions to better treat them. Because again, what I think everyone in this webinar will know is that there's not a recipe for every single patient. There's not a fixed kind of regimen. So it's important to kind of understand the differences in order for better treat our patients, 2, continue to talk about personalized treatment and have, you know, a better discussion on what is the best way, not to treat every single patient, not like all patients with GPA, but one patient with the GPA and the next, and the same for this condition, because that's what we need to aim for as well. So I think there's a building interest in kind of, again, trying to better characterize, better understand, better personalized disease to secure better outcomes.
Great. And, one of our viewers asked an interesting question. What would you suggest to make sure that our doctors and medical providers get the information that was given or was discussed at the conference?
It's a very good question, because I think at the same time, dissemination of information is I think that's a very good question. So one is, I think a lot of us who go to those meetings have the responsibility of coming back and talking. As someone who has come back from Barcelona and probably given I want to say 6 or 7 different talks to non-vasculitis specialists since I'm back, that is something that I take seriously, and I think most of my colleagues do as well, right? We having the fortune to take a seat in one of these meetings, I think dissemination of information is a responsibility for us, the same way as the VF is doing and other patient and international organizations to do so as well. I think I think when it comes to us, with regards to kind of, I think it might be difficult to say to your doctor, well, I've heard, I think it's fair to say there is this new meeting. I've just heard of this discussion about this other study, because again, prompting that, it's very difficult nowadays in the medical literature, particularly for someone who's not just primarily focused on vasculitis, to stay on top of everything. So I think that's the part where patients being educated and patients being empowered have a fantastic role in this as well. You're not necessarily going to say this is what you need to do, but hey, I heard about this study, or I heard about this in a VF webinar. Have you heard of it? And that, I think that is fantastic. I at this point, any kind of hint to new information, I think for me is exciting. I would imagine would be the same for any of our colleagues. So for anyone who's sitting here, or for anyone who has read something else exciting in the VF that would probably be applicable to their care or not, it's still kind of interesting to point it out. So it's dissemination and a little bit of word of mouth as well. But I think I'll say a big part of this is certainly on us who are active in the field, who need to continue, passing on this information and kind of educating our colleagues the same way as I get the same kind of information from a colleague who's an expert in a different part of the field as well.
Well, and we appreciate you doing that and coming on here. And we hope that the recording of this that will be up on the Vasculitis Foundation webinar is something that patients can use as a resource when they do talk to their doctors about it. So we do appreciate that. One interesting question: was there any discussion or presentations on artificial intelligence and its impact on research?
There has been a lot of, I think AI is an exciting field, and I would say that the answer is, my short and sweet answer is yes. Now, it has been probably discussed in different aspects. I wouldn't say that there were tons of it in this meeting, but I think what we are overall in the field of vasculitis or rheumatology, as well as in medicine, is trying to use AI with large data sets in order to better understand how to diagnose early, identify patients early, and potentially eventually also kind of understand, with all this data that we're collecting between clinical characteristics and all these little cells that we keep talking about, to better personalize treatment as well. So there's been a few studies. I wouldn't say that anything is kind of making it to prime time yet, I'll say, but this is just going to keep snowballing, and it's going to keep getting bigger and bigger, because I think it's an interesting field for everyone. So hopefully more to come. Nothing specific that really comes to mind, and again, not prime time, but the numbers will continue to increase every meeting. I have no doubt of that.
Well, we had to ask the question. It's a very interesting one. And I'm going to, if I can get Joyce Kullman to come back on here, I'm going to ask you a quick question about, they recorded these videos in the patient conference, correct? Is that something that is going to become available to everybody to watch as well?
Yes, so all the recording, we recorded all of the sessions, and Ed Becker just finished editing them yesterday. So they will be posted on the website. The videos are going to be available in Spanish, and then also the sessions in the afternoon, which were done in English. So, yep, Ed finished editing them yesterday. So we look forward to sharing them out with the community.
Well, great. They will be on the Vasculitis Foundation YouTube channel shortly then. And yep. We appreciate you, Dr. Sattui and Joyce, for coming on and telling us about your experience in Barcelona. patients, I think, were just waiting and waiting to find out more about that. So we do appreciate that. And I wanted to say to our patients, did you ever wonder how you could have an impact on important vasculitis research? The answer is that you should join the Vasculitis Patient Powered Network. I'm a patient champion for the VPPRN, and I encourage other patients to join the VPPRN and to complete their biannual forms. I can't tell you everything you should know about the VPPRN, so that is why I encourage you to learn more by visiting their website, which I think we're putting in the chat box. It's vpprn.org. And what I can tell you is it's a global patient registry, and patient data, that means your data, drives research in vasculitis by providing researchers with information about you and your experience. And that's key for advancing our knowledge of vasculitis. And before we thank everybody, is there anything, Dr. Sattui, that you want to add, or Joyce?
I will just chip in and following Kathy and saying that having presented data from the VPPRN, I think, and seeing and discussing it and getting feedback from some of our international colleagues, there's a lot of excitement, and this experience is trying to be replicated in different places as well. So I think the VPPRN has kind of taken the lead on this as well, and it's a unique opportunity for patients to be, like I said, having presented one of the big studies from the VPPRN in the big stage, for patients to be involved and empowered in research. I hope this continues to grow. I hope the vasculitis community continues to grow, because I think that we need to start including more kind of patients and physicians from Africa, the African region, Latin America as well. So I'm hoping to see even more and more, and just from those 900 this year to become 1,100 the next, and so forth, because I think the idea is for our reach to continue growing. So, but thank you everyone for sharing my excitement, and probably me rambling too much on a lot of different things.
Not rambling at all. Thank you so much for saying that for us and sharing all the information that you did. And thank you. So thank you, Dr. Sattui, and thank you to our sponsors at Amgen, AstraZeneca, Novartis, and of course, Joyce Kullman as well.
Oh, thank you, Kathy, for the invitation.